12 million Americans watched it live. But what they witnessed wasn't just a hearing. It was something else. Something heavier, more human. A billionaire sat in silence. A black congresswoman stood still. And a single child's letter, written in uneven handwriting and sealed in a blue envelope, brought the most powerful man in the country to his knees. In a nation still haunted by the ghosts of slavery, segregation, and the false promises of equality, this moment cut through the noise. It wasn't just about tax evasion or labor abuse or politics. It was about the cost of silence and the power of one voice that refused to stay quiet. Jasmine Crockett didn't just confront Elon Musk. She exposed a system that rewards cruelty, silences dissent, and turns workers into numbers on a spreadsheet. And as America watched, breath held, jaws clenched, a question echoed across the country. What are we really willing to tolerate in the name of progress? This is not just her story. It's a story of power, of pain, of reckoning. And it begins in a room where the air was thick with anticipation, and the world still believed the powerful were untouchable. It began like any other hearing on Capitol Hill. At least that's what it wanted you to believe. The room had the kind of atmosphere that made history feel distant, like the air was trying to convince you that nothing new could happen here. The walls were lined with polished mahogany, the lighting soft but clinical, and the buzz of camera shutters echoed faintly above the hum of anticipation. Reporters had arrived early, lined up along the back wall like patient vultures, their pens poised, not knowing whether they were about to record another forgettable piece of political theater or the tremor before an earthquake. Staffers whispered behind their clipboards, eyes darting between doors. Aides shuffled printed memos and tablets flickered with last-minute updates. And yet, underneath the calm choreography of bureaucracy, there was a charge in the room. Subtle, electric, the kind of energy that prickles your skin before lightning strikes. The hearing wasn't called to discuss innovation. It was called to investigate accusation. And at the center of it all stood a name too large to ignore: Elon Musk. He entered late, as if time bent for him. No rush, no apology. He didn't take a seat. He claimed it, like a returning king surveying a lesser court. His suit was flawless, his smile faintly amused, but it was the eyes that unsettled some of those present. Eyes that scanned the room not for danger, but for weakness. To the world outside, he was the architect of tomorrow, the man who promised Mars, electric revolutions, and human-machine symbiosis. But in this room, surrounded by the quiet hum of a democracy still trying to prove it worked, he was just another witness, or so it seemed. Then the door at the far end of the chamber opened. It didn't slam. It didn't creak. But somehow the sound turned heads. Jasmine Crockett stepped in. No entourage, no theatrics, just presence. She walked not with swagger, but with certainty, the kind that didn't demand attention, but commanded it anyway. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp, not with anger, but with purpose. She took her seat slowly, deliberately, placing a thick leather folder on the table before her, as though setting down a verdict already written. The room shifted. Something changed. Musk glanced over at her and offered a faint, dismissive smile. She didn't return it. She didn't need to. For those watching, on their televisions, laptops, phones, it still felt like the beginning of something familiar. But beneath the surface, viewers couldn't quite explain why their pulse had picked up, why the reporters had stopped fidgeting, why the air felt just a little heavier. There was no yelling, no drama, no accusations. Not yet. And yet everyone in the room felt it. Something was about to happen. And when it did, it wouldn't just be procedural. It would be personal. The committee chair began the roll call. Names were read. Responses followed. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the tension in Musk's jaw, the stillness in Crockett's hands, and the silent question that settled over the chamber like a storm cloud gathering above dry earth. What does it look like when the untouchable is finally touched? No one in that room knew the answer. Yet. But they were about to find out. And once they did, There would be no turning away. There are moments when a room changes without a sound. No doors slamming, no voices raised, just a shift so deep, so subtle, that it pulls the breath from your chest before you even know why. That's what happened in that chamber. The diagram on the screen was still glowing. Lines and boxes and numbers that now told a story no one in the room could unsee. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean in or deliver a rehearsed monologue. She simply laid out the truth, and then she stopped. And in that stillness, something broke. Elon Musk, a man who had built empires from disruption, who had crushed competitors with charisma and outwitted regulators with charm and defiance, sat frozen. His usual smirk had vanished. His lips were pressed together, his gaze unfocused, as if searching for a version of reality that didn't now include his own signature on a document instructing how to dodge the very country that made him a billionaire. But there was no such version. Cameras zoomed tighter. You could hear them adjusting. Not frantically, but like they too understood this was no longer routine. It wasn't theater. It was a reckoning. And Jasmine Crockett, she didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her stillness was deliberate, composed, like a judge who already knew the verdict, but was giving the accused a final moment to understand it. Her fingers rested lightly on the next page, not flipping it yet, just resting, as if asking the room, "Do you understand what this means?" Reporters leaned forward, notebooks forgotten. The chairman's gavel, which had moments before tapped impatiently, now sat untouched, like even procedure itself dared not interrupt what was unfolding. No one spoke. No one moved. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of realization that what they were witnessing wasn't a clash of egos or ideologies, but something much rarer, a truth so undeniable, so surgically delivered, that even power had no words in response. And somewhere, if you listened close enough, not with your ears but with your gut, you could feel the question humming in the air like electricity before a strike. What happens when power has nowhere left to hide? In that moment, it didn't matter how much Musk had built or who he'd inspired, because now the empire he'd crafted so carefully had begun to tremble. Not from protest, not from scandal, but from a single voice that refused to flinch. And in the voiceover silence of that collective breath, one truth rang clearer than any headline. Sometimes the loudest blow is the one you don't see coming. There's something deeply unsettling about seeing theft dressed up in paperwork. When Jasmine tapped her tablet again and the next slide appeared, it wasn't a bar graph or a line chart. It was a labyrinth, a sprawling web of interconnected companies registered in jurisdictions most Americans only hear about during scandals. Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, Luxembourg, places that don't make things, don't build things, but somehow become home to billions in profits. On the screen, each box had a name: dry, corporate, deliberately forgettable. But the red arrows connecting them told a very human story, the story of someone going to extraordinary lengths to hide something in plain sight. Jasmine let the screen linger as she spoke. "This is not innovation," she said quietly. "It's insulation, a system of walls, and not to protect jobs or ideas or progress, but to protect wealth from accountability." She moved slowly, letting the visual do its work. Each arrow was a flight path for money, each dotted line a hallway without windows. And at the very center of this maze, unmistakable, irrefutable, was a name: Elon Musk. Not his assistant, not his accountant. Him. She stepped to the monitor, finger hovering over a red highlighted box. "This entity," she said, "registered in Bermuda, has no employees, no physical address, and no operations. Yet it reports over $400 million in annual revenue as consulting." A pause, a breath. To whom? For what? Where is the invoice? The answer, Mr. Musk, is that there isn't one. Because this isn't business. This is evasion. There was a collective tightness in the room now, like everyone had instinctively started holding their breath. Jasmine didn't break the silence. She deepened it. She reached into her folder and drew out a printed email, its contents sharp and clinical. This, she began, is an internal communication dated June 14th, 2018, labeled RE Tax Optimization Strategy. She held it up with two fingers, the way one might hold something radioactive. The directive, in your words, shift projected earnings through Luxembourg shell to avoid U.S. liabilities. Goal, zero federal exposure. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And beneath those words, she said, flipping to the next page, is your signature. Original, verified. Another pause. Longer this time. No explanation, no embellishment, just the weight of what was no longer deniable. For most Americans watching at home, it felt like peeking into a world designed to stay invisible. A world where money didn't just travel, it vanished. Where a dollar earned wasn't taxed like yours or mine, but split, funneled, and rerouted through doors we don't even know how to knock on. Crockett knew that. That's why she didn't speak in jargon. She let the numbers speak for themselves. But what she made clear, without shouting, without even blinking, was this. While everyday families save receipts and file carefully to avoid a $200 mistake, the richest man in America built a maze so large it required congressional projection screens just to show its outline. And for the first time, that maze wasn't protecting him. It was exposing him. Just when the room had started to recover its breath, Jasmine tapped her tablet again. The screen behind her flickered, then glowed with a new document. Simpler than the maze of shell companies, but infinitely more damning. This one didn't need diagrams. It only needed a voice. Her voice. Let's look at tone, she said. Her words were deliberate, her gaze fixed on Musk. Not just structure, not just evasion, but tone, intention. She pressed the next cue. The audience, both in the chamber and across the millions watching from home, saw a dated internal email appear. March 2nd, 2020. Its subject line was innocuous. Its contents were anything but. She didn't embellish. She read it, line for line, with the calm precision of someone delivering a diagnosis. Not paying one damn cent to those idiots in D.C. Let them pass their fake budgets without me. There was no gasp in the room, only silence, more cutting than any sound. Not the silence of confusion, but of impact, of understanding. Jasmine lowered the tablet. She didn't need to repeat it. The words had already settled into the walls. That, she said after a moment, was not written by an angry intern. That was not sarcasm in a private group chat. That was a direct statement, authored and sent by you, Mr. Musk. Her voice was even, but every syllable carried the weight of stone. And when you said idiots in D.C., you were referring to the very public servants who approved your subsidies, defended your trade interests, and funded the roads and grids your companies rely on? Musk shifted in his chair. For the first time, his fingers flexed in agitation. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't look away. This isn't just about taxes, it's about contempt, she continued. Contempt for government, for oversight, for the very concept of accountability. Her words were soft, but each one landed with surgical precision. While American families paid their taxes during a pandemic, while nurses worked triple shifts and grocery clerks put on masks to keep the shelves stocked, you wrote this. She stepped forward only slightly, but enough to close the space between herself and the man across from her. You mocked the system that made you rich. You insulted the people who built the infrastructure beneath your empire. And you did it not with remorse or humility, but with disdain. That isn't innovation. That's arrogance dressed in cashmere. The email still hovered on the screen, damning in its bluntness, stripped of legalese or plausible deniability. Musk didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Not yet. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. And Jasmine, she didn't smile. She didn't press. She simply stood there, a mirror held up to a man who had spent his entire public life avoiding reflection. No one in that chamber moved, not even the ones who once defended him. The email had done more than reveal his words. It had revealed his mindset, not just a moment of ego, but a worldview where government was an obstacle and accountability, an insult. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't need to shout to make the room feel smaller. She spoke like steel, quiet, unbending, and impossible to ignore. There's something dangerously seductive about genius. When someone can bend metal into rockets and make satellites sing across continents, we stop asking questions. We trade our doubt for admiration, our oversight for awe, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, genius stops being brilliance and becomes immunity. That's what was unraveling in that hearing room. Not just Elon Musk's financial playbook or his email etiquette, but the illusion that brilliance can excuse anything, even contempt. For years, Musk had been celebrated as the man who defied gravity, not just literally, but culturally. He broke rules, skipped protocol, made wild promises, and often delivered. And in a country obsessed with disruption, we crowned him a visionary. We applauded his arrogance as confidence, his volatility as passion. We mistook impatience for insight. And now, as his own words sat glowing on the screen, unedited and undeniable, we were forced to ask, at what point does genius become justification for cruelty? The truth is, it never happens all at once. It begins in rooms just like this, when a man makes a joke about the people who regulate him, and no one laughs, but no one objects. It happens when he redirects blame with data and spin, and we call it leadership. It grows each time we let silence answer where accountability should have stood. And then one day, we look up and realize he's no longer just building rockets. He's building walls around his money, around his influence, around his own sense of consequence. In the echo of Jasmine Crockett's calm voice, something shifted. For the first time, the man who had reshaped entire industries wasn't standing at a launch pad. He was sitting at a table, exposed, not by scandal, but by truth. And it didn't take shouting. It didn't take rage. Just a woman brave enough to hold a mirror still until the image staring back could no longer look away. The real danger isn't when a man believes he's above the law. It's when the system starts believing it too. That's when lines blur. That's when oversight turns into endorsement. That's when power stops serving people and starts consuming them. As the email dimmed from the screen and the silence held just a little longer, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about one man's arrogance. It was about all the systems, all the voices, all the institutions that looked the other way, while he called them idiots and paid nothing back. And now someone was finally looking. For a moment, it felt like the hearing had reached its peak. The charts, the diagrams, the damning emails. They had peeled back the veil on greed. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to expose numbers alone. She came to reveal what those numbers had buried. Without raising her voice, she reached into her folder again. This time not for financial documents, but for something heavier. Thinner pages, worn, creased, testimonies. This, she said, is the part of your empire that never makes it into the headlines. The screen behind her changed. The diagrams disappeared. In their place, names, dates, and shift logs. Jasmine took a breath and opened the binder. 27 workers, she said. Not contractors, not third parties. Your employees from Nevada, Texas, and Fremont. And then she began. There was Darius, a line worker from the Nevada battery plant, who had logged 72 hours in 1 week. On his fifth consecutive 14-hour shift, he collapsed. It wasn't from exhaustion. It was a punctured lung, the result of an unreported machinery accident hours earlier. He had told his supervisor he couldn't breathe, but was told to walk it off or lose the bonus. He finished his shift. He didn't make it through the weekend. Then came Maria, an assembly worker from Fremont, who had asked for gloves after the abrasive chemicals began cutting into her palms. When she showed her bleeding hands, the supervisor shrugged and said, "You want safety? Find another job." She stayed. She had 2 kids. The gloves never came. The bleeding didn't stop. She learned to bandage herself in the bathroom during her break. 2 minutes, 3 times a day. Anything more than that, she was told, would be docked from her pay. And then there was the bathroom quote. Jasmine didn't speak it at first. She played it. A grainy audio recording, only 12 seconds long, but enough to shake the room. "If you need more than 2 minutes to piss, then maybe you don't belong here. After that, you're on your own time, and we don't pay for that. The voice wasn't shouting. It was calm, managerial, routine, like it wasn't cruelty, just policy. The silence in the room was different now. Not political, not procedural, emotional, thick, cold. Jasmine looked up, her fingers lightly touching the page in front of her. Progress, she said quietly, is not supposed to feel like punishment. But for these workers, that's what it became. Her voice didn't tremble, but it landed like grief dressed in clarity. Viewers at home watched, not blinking. This wasn't the story they had expected. It wasn't about rockets or earnings reports. It was about skin that bled and lungs that collapsed. It was about workers who gave their bodies to build someone else's dream and were told their pain was inconvenient. And as Jasmine turned the next page, she didn't look at Elon Musk. She looked at the room, at the senators, the cameras, the country, and asked without asking, how much dignity are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of speed? Because progress without people is just machinery, and machines don't bleed. The moment Jasmine Crockett tapped her remote and the audio began, everything else disappeared. There were no diagrams, no pages flipping, no gavel taps. Just a grainy 12-second recording. A voice clipped and dispassionate, issuing orders like a line cook barking about fries. If you need more than 2 minutes to piss, then maybe you don't belong here. After that, you're on your own time, and we don't pay for that. That was it. No background noise, no laughter. Just a plain statement of control. And somehow that made it worse. The air in the room didn't shift, it thickened. Journalists lowered their pens. The steady clack of laptop keys stopped mid-sentence. Even the camera operators paused their pans, unsure whether to zoom in or just hold the frame steady and let the silence do the work. Crockett didn't add commentary. She didn't need to. That voice, calm, indifferent, had done what charts and testimony couldn't. It made cruelty audible. It made efficiency sound like domination. It made the future of work feel like a cage with chrome trim. One senator on the panel shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat with no words to follow. Another glanced at the exit as if briefly wondering what it might mean to leave. Aid folders were no longer covering whispers. They were being clenched shut. And across from all of them, Elon Musk sat still, but not relaxed. His jaw twitched. His eyes, which once scanned the room with amusement, now locked on a point somewhere on the table. Not in thought, but in retreat. The camera caught it. Millions at home saw it. Not a breakdown, not panic, just the subtle signs of a man who suddenly realized that silence wasn't the shield he thought it was. He had built rockets, yes. He had sent cars into orbit. But now in a wood-paneled room he thought he could coast through, he was being cornered by something he hadn't accounted for. Humanity. Jasmine stood quietly. She wasn't reading now. She was simply watching the room absorb itself. That voice, she said softly, didn't come from a headline or a critic. It came from inside, from a supervisor trained not to question, but to enforce. Her gaze swept the room. This isn't an isolated comment. It's culture, one built not to inspire, but to intimidate. No one responded. No one could. Because the outrage wasn't coming from rage, it was coming from recognition. Everyone in that room had heard versions of that sentence before. Maybe not in those exact words, maybe not in that exact tone, but they had heard its cousins, the ones that told them to stay quiet, to work harder, to be grateful for less. And now with $1 billion empire's mask peeling away, they saw the truth they had ignored too long, that progress had been bought with silence, and silence had cost people their dignity. As the last echo of that recording faded, the silence that followed was not passive. It was judgment, and Elon Musk had no idea how to answer it. Jasmine Crockett didn't rush. She let the silence from the audio linger like smoke in a sealed room. Then slowly, she reached into the same folder. Not for another testimony, not for another log, but for something smaller, more fragile. A single sheet of paper, folded in half, edges worn from handling. This, she said, her voice lower now, was written by a former employee. a first-generation immigrant. He worked 72 hours the week he was fired for missing one shift due to fever. She unfolded the page carefully, as if it might tear from memory alone. He wrote this after being dismissed. He never sent it to HR. He sent it to me. She glanced up, not at Musk, but at the nation watching through 100 lenses. Then she read, and the words hung heavier than all the charts and data that had come before. Please tell Mr. Elon I'm not lazy. I just wanted to get better. I'm sorry. That was all. No complaint, no threat, just an apology from a man whose body broke before his spirit did. An apology from someone who had been made to feel that needing rest was a flaw, that being human was a liability. Jasmine folded the letter again, gently, almost reverently. This man, she said quietly, didn't ask for revenge. He asked to be seen. The weight in the room returned, not from confrontation, but from recognition. Because somewhere along the way, in our rush to idolize innovation, we began forgetting the people who make it possible. The hands that solder wires, clean floors, pack batteries, the ones who don't get headlines or stock options, the ones who make the gears turn, only to be treated as disposable when those gears begin to grind. In the tech age, the working class hasn't disappeared. They've been hidden, not by accident, but by design, folded behind algorithms, buried under corporate slogans, scrubbed from the PowerPoints shown to investors. Their voices aren't loud because they're not handed microphones. But when one of them speaks, quietly, from the corner of a letter never meant to be read aloud, the room can't help but listen. Jasmine Crockett didn't use this letter to indict. She used it to remind that the most dangerous lie we've told ourselves isn't that technology will save us. It's that we no longer need the people behind it. And in reading that letter, she gave one of them a seat at a table he never would have reached. Not with resumes, not with appeals, but with truth. And in doing so, she made the unseen visible again. By the time Jasmine Crockett tapped her screen again, the hearing room had gone from quiet to reverent, like people no longer watching a committee session, but a slow, precise dismantling of myth. The screen behind her lit up once more, but this time it wasn't filled with numbers or email chains. It was filled with names, dozens of them, verified journalists, university researchers, mental health nonprofits, combat veterans, climate scientists. And one thread connected them all. They spoke up, and then, quietly, suddenly, they disappeared. Not in real life, but in the place where attention lives now. Online. This, Jasmine began, is a list of accounts that, within 48 hours of criticizing Elon Musk or one of his companies, experienced measurable and algorithmic suppression. Her voice wasn't angry. It was precise, like she was reading out causes of death on an autopsy report. Reduced visibility, search delisting, engagement throttling, fundraiser collapses, shadow bans that were never acknowledged but always felt. She highlighted the first, a tweet from a climate journalist based in Oregon, challenging the environmental claims Tesla had made about its lithium sourcing. It was calm, factual, sourced. Within 2 hours, her article vanished from the trending section. By morning, her account was flagged for suspicious behavior, despite never having violated any terms of service. Her crowdfunding link, which supported investigative research, was removed for violating community integrity policies. It never came back. The second name, a tenured professor at MIT who published peer-reviewed findings questioning the integrity of Tesla's autonomous driving data. Not political, not personal, just science. 7 of his most cited tweets were throttled the same day. Engagement dropped by 93%. He contacted support, no response. 1 week later, his account was still public, but functionally invisible. Then came the nonprofit, a small mental health organization focused on PTSD support for veterans. They had posted a thread, no accusations, no hostility, simply anonymous testimonials from former SpaceX employees detailing mental burnout, panic attacks, suicidal thoughts triggered by punishing schedules, and relentless pressure. Within 48 hours, their posts were marked as potential misinformation. Donations dropped by half. They laid off 2 staff members. Crockett paused here. Let it sink in. This isn't about platform policy. It's about platform power and how that power has been weaponized, not to promote safety, but to suppress dissent. She turned back to Musk. This isn't moderation. This is manipulation. And it's personal. She tapped once more. A tweet appeared. Simple words. Real accountability would ask Musk why burnout is part of the Tesla culture. One of the replies below read, "Be careful. That tweet won't last." And it didn't. In that moment, Crockett wasn't just reading examples. She was telling stories of erasure, quiet, surgical deletions of uncomfortable truth. No knocks on doors, no public bans. Just digital silence, disguised as neutrality. And for millions watching, the message was unmistakable. Freedom of speech doesn't die in a headline. It dies in an algorithm. And if power controls that algorithm, it doesn't need to argue. It just needs to mute you until no one remembers you ever spoke at all. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to raise her voice to draw blood. She simply stepped forward, calm and composed, her eyes fixed on Elon Musk with the kind of stillness that says, "I am not here for spectacle. I am here to strip away the illusion." "You say you're protecting expression," she said, her tone steady, sharp as a blade drawn in silence, "but only when it praises you." The room didn't flinch, but something inside it tightened, because everyone understood, in that moment, that this wasn't about a single platform or a single man. It was about control, hidden in plain sight, wrapped in the language of freedom while functioning like a machine of quiet repression. Crockett turned toward the screen again, bringing back the case she had just touched upon. The small nonprofit, underfunded, overextended, focused on PTSD recovery for veterans. Their sin, sharing anonymous testimonials from former SpaceX workers who had broken down under extreme work conditions. There were no attacks, no profanity, just truth, raw and untreated. One post read, "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan and never felt more disposable than I did at that factory." Another, "We weren't just burned out. We were erased the moment we stopped being useful." The thread gained traction, slowly at first, then virally, and then, just as quickly, it vanished. The posts were flagged, their visibility throttled. Fundraising links were removed. Search results filtered them out like they'd never existed. The nonprofit's inbox was flooded with warnings about integrity enforcement, but no specifics. When they appealed, no human answered. When they posted again, fewer than 50 people saw it. Within 72 hours, their online presence, which had taken 7 years to build, was reduced to a whisper no algorithm would amplify. It didn't feel like censorship, it felt like disappearance. Jasmine didn't dramatize it. She simply called it what it was. "This is digital suffocation," she said. "This is what happens when free speech is filtered through the lens of ego. When the most powerful communication tool in the world becomes a selective megaphone, broadcasting only what flatters, burying what threatens." She paused, letting the thought linger like a bitter truth. "You've taken a platform that once helped fuel revolutions, that once gave voice to the voiceless, and turned it into a fortress, not to protect truth, but to defend power from criticism." She turned to face Musk again. "Your critics don't disappear because they're wrong. They disappear because you decide they should." The senators said nothing. Neither did the reporters. Because this wasn't science fiction. It was already happening. One click at a time, one algorithmic silence after another. In the modern world, censorship doesn't always come with bans or blacklists. Sometimes it comes with a polite message about reach limitations and content visibility adjustments. And by the time you realize what's happened, your voice is gone. Not by force, but by filter. And the myth of free speech? It crumbles not when people stop speaking, but when no one can hear them. By the time Jasmine Crockett returned to her seat, Elon Musk leaned forward, as if rehearsing deflection in real time. He drew in a slow, deliberate breath, the way only someone used to controlling a room does when the room begins slipping out of reach. Then with practiced ease, he began to speak. He didn't address the suppression allegations directly. He didn't mention the nonprofit or the flagged tweets or the muted accounts. Instead, he went big. "Let's not forget," he said, voice smooth but tight, that while some of you sit here pointing fingers, I've been building the future. His tone rose slightly, not angry, theatrical. We've launched reusable rockets, reduced millions of tons of carbon emissions, connected remote villages with satellite internet, brought electric vehicles to the mainstream. He gestured toward the cameras as if expecting the world outside to clap. While others talk, I build. While others regulate, I innovate. You're welcome. There it was, the pivot, from accountability to accomplishment, from questions to spectacle. It was the kind of narrative that had protected him for years, the logic that said progress earned immunity, that success excused everything. But Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't counter. She waited, letting the silence after his speech speak for itself. Then slowly, she turned her head, not with frustration, not with drama, but with something colder, cleaner, and she asked, "Who decides what's visible?" The words hung there, suspended between them like a thread pulled tight. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "That's all I want to know," she added. "Who gets to be heard? And why were these people erased?" Musk didn't respond. He blinked once, maybe twice, but the room saw it. That flicker, that tell. Because when the illusion of control is built on visibility, the most dangerous question is the one that demands to know who disappears and why. The room was silent again, but not empty. It was full of everything unspoken, everything understood. Because in the digital age, the question of what gets seen is no longer just technical. It's existential. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't just hold Elon Musk accountable. She held up the mirror to a world that had mistaken algorithms for objectivity and silence for order. And now the silence had answered back. Jasmine Crockett didn't announce what came next. She didn't preface it with warnings or declarations. She simply picked up the small remote, tapped once, and let the truth speak in its own voice. The screen behind her flickered to life, not with charts or documents this time, but with grainy handheld footage, the kind that never makes it into press kits. It was clearly a private setting, a lavish home, dimly lit with soft jazz murmuring in the background. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter echoed faintly, and in the center of the frame stood Elon Musk, drink in hand, casually gesturing to a small group of well-dressed guests. He was laughing, confident, at ease. He wasn't wearing a tie. He wasn't behind a podium. He wasn't posturing for shareholders or testifying under oath. He was unguarded, comfortable. And then, as if it were the most casual thing in the world, he said it. "I bought this government," he chuckled, lifting his glass. "I mean, let's be honest. These guys don't move unless I write the check." The moment the words left his mouth, the hearing room froze. The audio was crisp, the tone unmistakable. No sarcasm, no punchline. Just naked certainty delivered over a sip of something expensive. The footage ended as abruptly as it began. No dramatic fade-out, no music, no commentary. Just the truth, plain and undeniable, echoing in the stillness it left behind. No one moved. Not the senators, not the aides, not even the reporters, many of whom had already begun typing and then stopped mid-keystroke, stunned not by the words themselves, but by the ease with which they had been said. Jasmine didn't speak immediately. She let the silence bloom into something heavier than outrage. She let the implications settle like ash. Then finally she turned toward Musk. Not with anger, not even with disgust, just clarity. "This isn't a joke," she said quietly. "It's a confession." She held her ground. "You weren't caught in a hot mic moment. You weren't ranting to a friend. You were boasting, comfortably, to a room full of power brokers. And you weren't afraid, not of regulation, not of consequence, because you believed, perhaps still believe, that your money shields you from both." Musk didn't respond. He couldn't. The room had already made its judgment, not aloud, but in the collective tightening of shoulders, the narrowing of eyes, the shift from passive witness to complicit observer. Because when a man says, "I bought this government," and no one in the room challenges him, the question isn't whether he's lying. The question is how long everyone else has known it was true. Jasmine stepped back, letting the moment stand untouched. She didn't demand accountability. She exposed the reason it had never come. And for the first time, the hearing wasn't about a company or a product or a billionaire. It was about democracy itself and what happens when we sell it to the highest bidder. The video had cracked the room open, but it was what came next that peeled the illusion all the way back. Jasmine Crockett turned back to the table, her hands moving with calm precision as she retrieved another folder. Thicker this time, tabbed with color-coded sections and lined with highlighted pages. "Let's talk numbers," she said, her tone never rising, never theatrical. "Not projections, not valuations, real numbers, quiet ones." The screen behind her lit up with a spreadsheet, stark rows of dates, entity names, packs, and disbursements. Jasmine didn't narrate it all at once. She let the weight unfold one row at a time. "Over the last 7 years," she began, "more than $72 million in political contributions were funneled through third-party organizations, shell packs, donor-advised funds, and 501c4s labeled as social welfare nonprofits." Her finger pointed to one entity, the Artemis Freedom Coalition, filed as nonpartisan, received $12 million in contributions, all from accounts linked to either Mr. Musk or his executive proxies. She tapped another row. From there it was fragmented, dispersed in small, legally gray increments to candidates, state-level committees, and lobbying firms. Not one of them disclosed the original source. Not one of them reported the link back to Tesla or SpaceX or X Corp. She looked up. "Not even to your name." A ripple passed through the room, not verbal but visible. One senator glanced to her right. Another shifted in his seat, loosening his collar in a room that was no warmer than before. An aide seated behind the judiciary panel leaned in to whisper something urgent. Eyes that once looked at Jasmine with polite skepticism now darted toward the screens with quiet calculation, as if they were wondering not if this was true, but how long it had been. Jasmine didn't break her rhythm. "This isn't campaign finance," she said. "It's strategic obfuscation. You didn't donate to support democracy. You invested to control it. And you did it so well, most of the recipients never even knew who they were indebted to." She stepped closer to the center of the room now, voice steady but colder. "This isn't just unethical, it's systemic. It's how power cloaks itself in legality while bending policy to its will. And this," she added, gesturing to the data on the screen, "is how oligarchies are built. Not with coups or generals, but with quiet spreadsheets routed through Delaware." The hearing room no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like a mirror. And what it reflected wasn't just Musk. It was everyone who had ever nodded along, every official who had taken the donation without asking the question, every lawmaker who had dismissed rumors of back-channel influence as political noise. Now there was no noise, just numbers. And for the first time it was clear. The most dangerous threat to democracy doesn't announce itself with thunder. It walks in on silent feet, wrapped in tax-exempt status and strategic ambiguity, until someone brave enough reads it aloud. And Jasmine Crockett just did. Jasmine Crockett stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the spreadsheet settle over the room like dust in an abandoned church. The silence was no longer suspenseful. It was something else now, uncomfortable, personal, because everyone in that chamber understood what had just happened. She hadn't merely unmasked one man. She had lifted the veil off an entire ritual, the quiet, well-practiced ceremony of influence that took place behind closed doors, inked in PAC filings and never questioned by those who benefited from its shadow. Then she turned, not just to Elon Musk, but to the entire panel. Her eyes didn't accuse. They reflected. "This isn't about one man," she said, voice low but unwavering. "This is about how many look the other way, how many convinced themselves that progress justified proximity, that donations were harmless, that silence wasn't complicity, just politics." Her words weren't angry, but they landed like guilt rediscovered. She walked slowly toward the center aisle, eyes tracing the faces of senators who had once smiled politely at Musk's ideas, who had once spoken his name with admiration at fundraisers, tech conferences, and closed-door dinners. You didn't need to be paid to stay quiet, she continued. You just needed to believe that staying quiet was safer, that asking the hard questions would cost too much, that the voters back home wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. A screen still glowed behind her with transaction lines, donor pathways, PAC connections, but she wasn't pointing at data anymore. She was pointing at truth. Democracy, she said softly, was never meant to be bought, but it doesn't always get sold with cash. Sometimes it's sold with silence. She turned to the crowd now. Journalists, aides, citizens, all of them witnessing a moment they didn't expect to carry this much weight. When we ignore the money because it's dressed like ambition, when we excuse the influence because it comes wrapped in innovation, when we allow one voice to whisper louder than millions, we lose something we don't always know we've lost until someone shows us the mirror. The room didn't respond. No applause, no gavel, just stillness, because Jasmine Crockett hadn't asked them to punish Elon Musk. She had asked them to face themselves, and that was harder. Jasmine Crockett closed the folder slowly. The numbers were done. The emails had been read. The charts had been shown. But what she did next wasn't about documents. It was about something no spreadsheet could measure. The cost in flesh, in fire, in the silence that follows a knock at the door in the middle of the night. She turned toward the back of the chamber and gave a quiet nod. All eyes followed as a woman entered. Plain black dress, no makeup, shoulders drawn but spine straight. Rosa Alvarez didn't look like a lobbyist or a political pawn. She looked like someone who had lost something she would never get back. She walked down the center aisle, her hands clutching a folded piece of paper and a child's drawing. The room didn't breathe. Jasmine met her halfway and stood beside her, offering nothing but presence. No grand introduction, no framing, just, this is Rosa Alvarez. Her husband Daniel worked at the Tesla battery plant in Sparks, Nevada. Rosa's voice was soft, but it carried. Daniel worked 16-hour shifts, sometimes 6 days a week. He always came home tired, but proud. He believed in what he was building. He believed it mattered. She paused, her grip tightening around the paper. The week he died, he told his supervisor the fire alarm system in the lower corridor wasn't functioning. He asked to leave early. He was told no. We can't afford delays, they said. She steadied her breath. 2 hours later, there was an explosion. No one moved. No senator shifted. Even Musk, usually unreadable, stared ahead, jaw set. I got the call at 3:07 a.m., Rosa continued. But it wasn't from the company. It was from one of his co-workers. They said Daniel didn't make it out. They said he was trying to pull someone else out when the ceiling came down. She unfolded the drawing, crude, colorful, innocent. A stick figure with a red cape, surrounded by crayon hearts. Our daughter made this the next morning. She told me, Dad is a hero now, right? And I didn't know what to say. Jasmine stepped forward again, this time holding a small envelope. Blue bent at the corners. This, she said, is the letter Rosa's daughter, Elena, sent to my office. She unfolded it carefully and began to read. Dear Miss Jasmine, my daddy died at work. He tried to tell them something was broken, but they made him stay. Please help. Don't let more dads be gone. Love, Elena. The words were written in uneven lines, with letters flipped and misshapen. But no one in that room misread them. They didn't need translation. They didn't need context, because they carried something too raw, too real to be reduced to talking points. Jasmine placed the letter gently on the table beside the financial evidence, like a final piece of proof. But this one didn't show fraud. It showed consequence. It showed what happens when speed replaces safety, when silence becomes standard, when the cost of asking to go home early is paid in lives. And in that moment, the room understood something Elon Musk never said, that sometimes the most powerful truth doesn't come from a billionaire or a senator. It comes from a little girl with a crayon. The room didn't react all at once. It didn't gasp, didn't whisper, didn't fidget. It just stopped. As Jasmine finished reading Elena's letter, her voice soft but unwavering, a silence fell so complete it felt like the oxygen had been pulled from the chamber. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Not the senators, not the aides, not the press in the gallery. Even the blinking lights of the cameras seemed to freeze, caught between recording and reverence. Jasmine remained standing, one hand gently pressing the folded paper against the oak table, the other resting beside Rosa Alvarez, who stood in a stillness that wasn't rehearsed. It was the stillness of someone who had lived through something she never expected to speak about in public. She didn't cry. She didn't break. She simply stood as if holding the weight of both her husband's memory and her daughter's question. Dad is a hero now, right? And then, slowly, it happened. A senator on the left rose. No speech, no gesture, just stood. Then another, this time from the opposite side of the aisle. A woman who earlier had furrowed her brow in skepticism during the financial presentations. She rose, her lips slightly parted, eyes lowered. One by one, the room followed. Staffers stood behind their chairs. Journalists lowered their devices and rose. Even those who had defended Elon Musk's contributions to innovation, those who had once marveled at his vision, found themselves standing, not in protest, not in political alignment, but in something older than ideology, shared humanity. Still, there was no applause, no movement beyond the act of rising, because there are moments where sound diminishes meaning, where silence becomes a kind of language, and standing becomes an acknowledgement, not of victory, but of truth. Jasmine looked around the room, her gaze sweeping the panel slowly, not as a performance, but as a witness. Then she turned back to the table where the piles of documents sat. Printouts of tax evasion pathways, diagrams of shell companies, transcripts of emails that mocked oversight. Without ceremony, she took Elena's letter and laid it gently on top of them, covering the charts and signatures with a single page written in crayon-scrawled sincerity. This, she said, her voice lower than before, but resonant in the silence, is the most important piece of evidence we've seen today. This, she said, her voice lower than before, but resonant in the silence, is the most important piece of evidence we've seen today. No one argued, because how could they? What spreadsheet could speak louder than a child begging strangers not to let other fathers die? What flowchart could compete with the grief of a widow who had to explain heroism through absence? What defense could be offered? What innovation cited? What progress invoked? That could stand taller than that one folded envelope, now resting over a mountain of corporate indifference? For once, even Elon Musk had no words. He didn't lean forward, didn't interject. He simply stared ahead, expression locked in the sort of stillness that no longer came from confidence, but from calculation confronted by conscience. And in that moment, the most powerful man in the room wasn't the one with rockets or billions. It was a little girl with a letter, and a mother brave enough to read it aloud. There are moments in public life where logic loses its grip, where graphs and audits and bullet points dissolve into the background, and something else, something quieter, more primal, takes hold. That's what happened in the chamber that day. Not when the documents were revealed, not when the numbers hit the screen, but when a child's letter, misspelled and smudged by small hands, was read aloud under the dome of power. Grief did what data could not. It leveled the room. It stripped away partisanship, titles, and reputations, until all that remained were people, vulnerable, unarmored, human. No senator stood because a law was violated. No staffer rose because a policy was breached. They stood because a little girl had shown them, in 12 uneven sentences, what consequence truly looks like. Not theoretical, not legal, but lived. A father who never came home. A mother who had to carry his memory into a courtroom of strangers. A daughter who still believed heroes wore capes, even when they didn't survive. And that's the thing, isn't it? In the halls of governance, power usually enters the room wearing suits and speaking in legalese. But that day, it walked in folded in an envelope and written in crayon. And for once, that voice, the smallest voice, wasn't just heard. It changed everything. Jasmine Crockett didn't have to say it outright. The room already knew that no amount of CO2 reduction, no rocket launch, no satellite constellation could undo the damage done to a family that had simply asked for safety and been met with silence. There are no performance metrics for pain, no quarterly earnings for dignity, and yet that was what had been sacrificed, again and again, behind closed factory doors and beneath glowing headlines of disruption. Musk had spent the hearing positioning himself as a builder of the future, but it took a child to remind the room what was being buried beneath that future. And Jasmine, when her quiet, razor-sharp clarity had done what few dared, she let that child speak. Not metaphorically, literally. Sometimes the truth is written in crayon, and when it is, it's not less serious. It's just harder to ignore. As the chamber settled back into their seats, the weight of what had just unfolded still hung in the air like smoke after a controlled burn. Except there was nothing controlled about this. There had been no shouting match, no grandstanding, no last-minute outburst. Just an avalanche of quiet truths, and now at the center of it all sat Elon Musk, motionless. No hand raised to object, no rebuttal offered, no attempt to twist narrative. For a man who had built his empire on voice, on dominance, disruption, deflection, his silence now was thunderous. He adjusted nothing, didn't lean in to clarify or reach for a mic. He just sat, eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the hearing room, like someone running through calculations in his mind and realizing none of them could solve what had already been said. And then Jasmine Crockett spoke, but not to him. She turned to the committee chair, her tone now almost subdued in volume but amplified in intent. "This silence is no longer strategy," she said. "It's a confession." The room understood. So did the cameras, and the millions watching from homes, break rooms, hospital lobbies, places far from Capitol Hill but closer to the truth than any corporate HQ. Crockett's words weren't a flourish. They were a diagnosis. Silence at this level, in the face of evidence this precise, isn't self-control. It's surrender. The committee chair cleared her throat, not out of nerves but to slice through the stillness. Her voice was measured, formal, but sharpened by moral weight. "Based on the evidence presented," she began, "and pursuant to Section 12 of the Oversight Authority Charter, this committee will formally recommend the initiation of a Department of Justice inquiry into potential criminal tax fraud, labor violations, and obstruction of regulatory oversight involving Mr. Elon Musk and his affiliated entities." A single gavel hit the desk. It didn't echo. It struck. And just like that, what had begun as another oversight hearing had become a referral for criminal investigation. Not symbolic, not procedural, real. Around the table, faces once stoic now looked uneasy. Those who had casually invoked Musk's name as a synonym for progress were suddenly recalculating their proximity to power. Staffers leaned into one another. Phones buzzed quietly with messages that would soon become headlines. And at the center of the storm, still unmoving, was Elon Musk. The man who once boasted that he bought the government, now watching that same government begin to hold a receipt to the light. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had done what few ever dared, confronted a man so wrapped in wealth, worship, and myth that even institutions had hesitated to whisper his name too loudly. And now, with evidence laid bare and no answer returned, his silence had done what no scandal or headline could. It had admitted everything, not with an apology, but with absence. The hearing may have ended with a gavel, but outside the Capitol, something far louder had begun. Within hours of the DOJ referral, the first hashtag appeared. #, Elon accountable. Then another, letter from Elena. And then came a flood. Workers from Tesla's Nevada plant uploaded short, unfiltered videos in front of time clocks and parking lots, speaking directly into the camera with voices that shook but didn't waver. "We were told not to talk about safety. They made us believe exhaustion was a badge of honor. We kept quiet because we thought no one would care. And now someone did." In Boston, a political science professor rewrote his syllabus overnight, replacing a week on corporate ethics with a new module titled The Crockett Doctrine: Ethics, Evidence, and the Limits of Power. At a law school in Michigan, students dissected the hearing not as theater, but as precedent. On campuses and classrooms, in cafeterias and church basements, people weren't just watching clips. They were studying them, Because Jasmine hadn't just confronted a man. She had documented a system, and in doing so, she had offered something far rarer than outrage, a framework. But even as hashtags trended and stories were shared, Jasmine Crockett remained silent. Reporters camped outside her office. News anchors speculated. Editorials praised her poise, her preparation, her precision. Still, she didn't speak. No press conference, no interviews, just a short written statement posted quietly to her official website and left unamplified. This isn't my story, it's theirs. 7 words. And with them, she did something few in public life ever do. She stepped aside. She didn't claim the moment. She protected it. She let the light stay where it belonged. Not on her name, but on the voices she had lifted. Rosa Alvarez, Daniel, Elena. The workers whose lungs gave out. The hands that bled. The engineers who were told to shut up or get out. And maybe that's why the movement didn't die after the headlines faded. Because it wasn't built on personality, it was built on pain that had gone too long without recognition. And now, for the first time, that pain had found a translator. And a nation that had once scrolled past now stopped, watched, and finally, listened. Outside federal buildings across the country, people gathered not to shout, but to hold signs bearing quotes not from politicians, but from factory workers. "I'm not lazy, I just wanted to get better. Dad is a hero now, right? This isn't about one man. It's about how many look the other way." A mural appeared overnight on a wall in Oakland. A little girl holding a crayon in one hand and a folded letter in the other. No face, no name, just 3 words painted in bold beneath her feet. Truth stood still. And now the country was finally moving. The rotunda was silent when Jasmine Crockett walked in. There was no crowd, no applause, no music swelling in the background. Just a single wooden chair, a microphone, and a table with one object resting on it. A folded piece of paper sealed in a blue envelope. The same envelope that had stopped a room full of power. The same letter that had shifted the conversation from numbers to names, from empire to humanity. Elena's letter. Jasmine sat, adjusted the mic once, and looked straight into the camera. Not with charisma, but with clarity. "My name is Jasmine Crockett," she began, "and I'm not here tonight as a politician, or a prosecutor, or a headline. I'm here as a witness." She didn't read statistics. She didn't invoke economic projections or party lines. She told the story of a man who died trying to do the right thing, and of a little girl who had to make sense of it all with nothing but crayons and grief. And then she delivered the line that would echo long after the camera shut off. Innovation without humanity is not progress. It's betrayal. No dramatics, just truth. Clean, unforgiving, and undeniable. 2 days later, the bill passed. No fireworks, no champagne flutes in marble chambers, just signatures, quiet affirmations, pages turning. The legislation, dubbed the Technology and Human Rights Balance Act, mandated independent audits of labor practices at companies with over 10,000 employees. It granted whistleblower protections to tech workers and established a permanent oversight committee on algorithmic transparency. But beyond all that, it included one line, personally written by Crockett's team, printed in bold, centered on the page. "No technology, no matter how transformative, shall be allowed to violate the fundamental rights to safety, dignity, and truth without consequence." Not a slogan, a standard. Outside the Capitol, crowds didn't cheer. They stood, as they had in the hearing, in silence, in witness. Not for her, but for themselves. For the parts of them that had been dismissed, silenced, buried under someone else's version of the future. Jasmine left the rotunda alone. She didn't wait for cameras or statements. She placed the envelope back into her bag and walked out into the dusk. Her job was never to become the story. It was to make sure the right one got told. And now it had. And as Jasmine Crockett disappeared into the fading light beyond the Capitol steps, the story she left behind continued. Not in headlines or hashtags, but in hallways, boardrooms, factories, and family dinners. A story not just of accountability, but of memory. Because at its heart, this wasn't a battle between a congresswoman and a billionaire. It was a reckoning between what is easy and what is right, between a system built to forget and a voice brave enough to remember. In an age that rewards speed over reflection, spectacle over substance, and profit over people, we are reminded that the true test of progress isn't how far we can go, but who we leave behind when we get there. The lives we ignore in pursuit of ambition, the voices we mute for the comfort of convenience, the small hands that write letters no one is supposed to read, and yet change everything. Sometimes the most radical act is simply to listen, and sometimes the most powerful truths are not shouted, but whispered, in grief, in honesty, in crayon. This story was crafted under principles of fair use, incorporating public events, commentary, and fictionalized analysis for educational, documentary, and transformative purposes. Its goal is not to vilify, but to illuminate, not to condemn, but to confront. Because history does not belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who dare to challenge them. And now the question is not what Jasmine Crockett did, but what we will do next. Thank you for staying till the end. Your time, your heart, your presence matters more than you know. If this story spoke to you, speak back. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let's keep this conversation and this fight alive.